Good afternoon. My name is Chris Biznett. I am the Outreach Librarian for the Freeport Memorial Library, and today I'm going to be creating a garden from scratch. I will be kind of doing a series of small videos to kind of show you how I'm going to do that, because can be quite extensive. So I'll be going over some of the basic steps, materials, and other such things that you'll need to create a garden from scratch. So I guess as we move forward, I will show you how to do that. Now, first and foremost, one of the big important steps is that you have to choose is location for a garden. Typically you want a lot of sun, preferably easy access to a water hose or spigot so you can water your garden easily. So one of the important steps you have to look at is gardening. So that's the first choice, is trying to pick a location. So once you have your location picked, there are some things you basically need first before you get started, as you get started. And one of the things that you could use is like a rake, shovel, rototiller. Some of the basic supplies is garden lime, which helps is a soil amendment, helps bring down the acidity in soil, and it also serves as a soil sweetener for certain vegetables like peppers. Another important thing is fertilizer that you could use for the soil amendment. Usually you can do chicken manure and or actual cow manure. So again, I have my location chosen. I'm going to show you. I measured it off a little bit. It's kind of like I'm going to say maybe 12 by like 16 feet is what I kind of roughly measured it off to be. Maybe a little smaller, but I will show you the size of that in a minute. Now, to deal with a couple of tools, you can use a shovel. This is your garden variety garden rake. You can also use some hand tools, a couple trowels and a small little hand rake that you can use to keep the garden flat and groomed. And also they're very good at keeping, planting. One tool I don't have here is something called a hoe. And what that basically is, it's a flat piece of metal. It's like you got a arm like that, but it's a flat piece of metal, like a square. And you can use it to create a divot in like a line in the soil. You could create a line, and it helps you keep your rows straight. And you can allows you to plant seeds a lot easier and then bury it faster. One thing you could use is my father used to have like a couple of wooden stakes with string tied across it or tied around it, and it was good. You could stretch out a good 30-40 feet, and you could use these stakes to kind of also, as you're going up and down your row, to mark your rows and keep them straight better. Keep them more straight. You could tie string around these two of these sticks if you wanted to, and helps you keep your rows in a straight row. Kind of a little, ingenious idea and whatnot. So some of the equipment that I mentioned earlier was a rototiller, this is just like a standard blade. It's got standard blades on it. Kind of chops up the ground. In this instance, I'm going to be using a hedge trimmer, because the area that I have chosen, or my landlord's allowing me to use, is a kind of brush area, so it needs to be cut back a little bit. I will show you that in a minute. You can also use gardening pots, or container gardening as they call it. I tried this last year, a couple years ago, and I had some okay success with it. Some of the other materials I also have to use is manure, which is I guess coop poop as they call it. This is chicken manure. You have their garden lime. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it is good for It is good for sweetening the soil and is good for garden amendment. Also lowers the acidity of the soil. And then also I had some leftover cow manure from last year that I will use up today as well. You can also use a rake, shovel. This is sort of like a little mini rototiller, a 5-prong rake, a regular rake and shovel if I needed it. So those are just some of the equipment that I will be using today to use. So again, rototiller, hedge trimmer, your typical garden variety tools, shovel, rakes, and then garden lime and garden fertilizer, cow manure, and chicken coop. Okay, this is your standard rototiller. It's a machine that you can use to create gardens, grind up gardens. It's got blades at the bottom here that chop into the ground, and you can usually dig pretty deep in order to get the ground chopped up and get dug deep and loosen up the soil underneath, because that's important for a lot of roots for seeds. It's a bit like they can go downward. So it's like as you can see, they're kind of chopped like teeth, blades. So this is just your standard rototiller. They come in different sizes. The one my grandma used to have was only like 3-bladed, I believe. Might have been even 2-bladed, but it was smaller than this one. This one's 13 by 22 by 24. So it can cover a lot of space. So, you know, can easily do a 10 by 16.5 size garden very quickly. I mean, the hardest part would be just kind of cutting through the grass and, you know, chopping that up, making sure the sod is all cut up and ground up. Plus it allows the grass to kind of rot. It serves as a type of soil amendment you could use, because it's, you know, basically using as fertilizer as it rots. And then you can also, you know, as you go through, you can also put in cow manure, chicken manure, and lime, which raises the pH of the soil a little bit and is good for peppers, because it kind of acts as a sort of soil sweetener. So something to think about when you're gardening, when you're putting in manure. It's a good way to mix in the soil. So again, this is just your standard rototiller, and here you have the gas. You got to make sure it's always on a full tank. This button is for the speed. It goes down. If you push it down, it's for slow, and then up, it goes faster. This is the choke. The choke basically allows you to kind of jump start a little bit and allows you to help start the machine if it's been sitting around for a couple weeks, or if you're starting the season or something like that, it to, you know, move when you start to rototill. So you push that in, push this up, and then you give it a crank. This little hand crank right here, usually a couple, 3 cranks. This particular model, which is, you know, a Honda GC 160 5.0, couple, 3 cranks from what I've had in the past, and it starts right up typically. It might, if it's been sitting around all winter, might take 3, 4 cranks. So something to think about. This is the handle that push it backwards if you get stuck, or you need to back up and hit the same spot again. This lever right here is to push it forward, to give it the momentum forward, and it engages the blades to push it forward. So essentially that's how you kind of operate a general rototiller, standard rototiller. Spark plugs here if you need to clean a spark plug. Sometimes if it's an older rototiller, you might need to clean clean or replace the spark plug. To put oil in it, which I've actually never had to do it so far. I'm pretty sure this is where you have to put the oil in. In terms of draining it, I'm not sure how to drain it, but if you need to put oil in it, you can put it here. You can unscrew this, and it should work. And that's it. That's your how to operate a basic rototiller. So, as you can see, I marked off the garden. I just using whatever I had, garden materials, whatever I had. I'll go over some of this other stuff later on because it's these are important aspects. So this is kind of the area that I've chosen, kind of be my garden. So what I'm going to do next is I'll show you kind of before and after of what it looks like. I'll kind of take a step-by-step process. One of the first things we're going to do is we're going to cut back this hedge a little bit. My landlord has kindly lent me his garden hedge trimmer, and we're going to cut it back a little bit to kind of make it look a little better and kind of not let it let some overgrowth in. So we'll be careful. So typically if you have to do something like this, garden cleanup is also important as much as garden location. So once you pick your spot, obviously you may have to clean up the garden a little bit. So in this area, we're going to clean up this fence. Okay, one of the things I want to mention today is some tools and gardening instruments that you could use to help the garden. This is your standard tomato cage. It's big, it's made of wire, of a heavy wire. You can push it down the ground, and what it does is it helps keep the tomato plant, once it starts growing, supported throughout the year. Tomato plants, as if some of you may or may not know, they grow very tall, up to about 3 or 4 feet, depending on how it goes, depending on how the season is. So this is used for supporting tomatoes, and it's it's fairly cheap, and you can get it at any garden variety nursery or Home Depot or Lowe's. Another important piece of equipment that I've kind of been learning to use over the last few years is trellises. Trellises are good for supporting beans, and they're also good for supporting cucumbers as well, I've learned. The cucumbers used to climb up tomato cages I used to use at my mother-in-law's house, and I've since used them here, and they are good for that. The beans were also supported by tomato cages as well, but I've gotten, like I said, several of these trellises, and they are good for, again, cucumbers and beans to climb up. I wouldn't have thought like cucumbers, because when I was a kid, my father used to plant his garden. We used to let them stand the ground. But one of the problems with keeping them on the ground is sometimes they might be more susceptible to rotting. Whereas if you get them up in the air, they're more exposed to the sun. They might ripen a little faster, and they're overall, generally speaking, healthier from what I've seen in my own personal experience. That's just from my own personal experience. So these are some couple important garden implements that you can use with trellises and tomato cages. And there are other things you could use. These are just your standard garden gates, I guess I'll call them. They just kind of used to line gardens, mostly flower gardens. I'm going to use them a little bit to try to keep the landscaper from hitting my garden. That was one of the problems I had last year with that spot over there. Was the gardener hit a couple of my plants, and I wasn't too happy about it. So I'm going to use these. Which, funny story behind these, my landlord found these when he was cleaning out a part of his yard next to his porch, and he found several of these intact. So better to reuse, and also and recycle them. So I'm gonna use them to block off my garden here a little bit as my plants go outward and whatnot. So yeah, better to reuse than get rid of. One of the important things about gardening is where you're going to place your garden. And one of the locations I used last year, which I mentioned in a previous video, was over here, but some of the problems that I had with this was too much shade, not enough sunlight. The trees and leaves over here kind of fell off, and the seeds fell off into the garden, and overall it was just a generally bad location. So I decided to, with permission from my landlord, to move my garden over here, which gets about 7 to 8 hours worth of sun. A lot of gardens need about 7-8 hours of direct sun, and it is a typical garden needs a lot of sun in order to make the soil the right temperature and also, help the plants grow. So this was about I'm going to say 10 by 16 feet. We had over here, we had a lot of brush, as I mentioned in previous videos, that we cleaned up, and some of the video was shown of how I was kind of cleaning this up. And one of the advantages of cleaning this up was actually I kind of gave myself an additional hour or so of sunlight, because the shade was so thick that I wasn't sure if I was going to get a lot more sun. So I still might clean a little bit more up with permission from my landlord, if he'll let me, and might be able to get more sunlight for an additional half hour, 45 minutes to keep the sun shining on my plants and garden, because having a warm soil is important for the germination of seeds, and it's also good because a lot of the plants survive on a process called on sunlight, so with chlorophyll and whatnot. You can arrange your garden any way you want once you've picked the location. A lot of sun, easy access to water, but you can arrange your garden any way you want. So how I did mine this year was tomatoes down here at this end, because this is where you're going to get the most of the sun, I felt. In the middle here I have cucumbers and several types of beans with the trellises that are going to climb up. I have also planted lettuce, herbs, chard, and different types of overall lettuce in this area, because I figured this would be the fastest and easiest to grow. I'm also growing radishes as well. They're a quick grower, so if something needs more space, the radishes will go pretty quick, and I won't need to have as many when I need more space. Down here I have planted pumpkins, watermelons. I have planted corn, actually, for the first time in several years. I haven't planted corn in quite some time, but I've got several different varieties of corn in here, some that are probably going to grow 6, 7, 8 feet based on the variety from what I've read. I've also got watermelon and some types of muskmelon and Amish house melon, and I'm not sure what else I put, but this is kind of how I arrange my garden. So you can arrange any way you want. Typically I used to have corn at the ends with the pumpkins at the end. That way if they need to go off into the yard a little bit, that way they can have room to grow. We'd also leave a lot of space with tomatoes. I didn't grow peppers this year because we had so many from last year that we just decided to not have them this year. So like I said, location's important, and then arranging your garden is important. Tomatoes need a lot of sunlight, as well as pumpkins and squash. Actually, I did plant a couple squash over here as well. Summer squash, and I believe winter squash as well. So you can arrange any way you want, but you can have like a lot of the plants in the middle. You cut down a lot of the space on the cucumbers because they go up. So usually when I was younger, we used to let the cucumbers go across. So it would be, you'd have them on the floor, on the ground. So if I had the cucumbers going up, I could save a lot of space. So something to think about. Okay, so as you can see, we have cleaned the fence off a lot better than it was, because my landlord had allowed me to do this. But make sure you even if you have your own house, you know, or have a landlord that's willing to let you, you know, do something like this, always ask for permission. And if we're of your own house, looks a lot better now, doesn't it? This is kind of a mess over here a little bit, still cleaning up a bit, but obviously a lot better. And I think one of the good things is I actually bought myself an additional couple of hours of sun, potentially. My landlord has said that he would be interested in doing a little bit more work over here, but so that would give us even more sun. But right now it looks pretty good. There's a natural kind of line that I can probably follow right here a little bit. And yeah, so far this is how it's looking so far, and it's looking good. So I will keep you posted. Okay, now that we had a chance to clean off the fence and clean up our area, what I've done for this garden is I've created kind of a line with a shovel. You can see there's a dark line all the way around. I kind of cut the sod where I'm gonna run the rototiller for the most part. So this is, I'm just etching out a spot where I'm probably gonna, that's how size of my garden's gonna be. I was gonna cut something on this side, but there's a natural kind of line from the bush, from the brush line up to here, so I'm just gonna leave it the way it is and start rototilling shortly. A finished product would look like this, or once I'm finished. So I'll have a little bit more to say about this spot in a little bit, because this was my garden from last year. But I will, in the process of reseeding it, because I'll have some thoughts about this later, between that and the container boxes that we have over here. So I'm going to be using this guy next to cut the garden up. Like I said, it's probably about 12 by 16, 15 and a half, 16 feet-ish. So you'll be seeing a finished product here in a minute. So as you can see, we're ready to take the next step after we've cleaned up the spot where we're going to be, and now kind of cut a spot where we're going to be. Okay, this is the official kind of like what my garden looks like. It's kind of official, roughly what a official garden sort of looks like officially. Need to rake it a little bit, get some of this extra grass out of here. But this is what ideally a finished garden looks like. Not quite 12 by 16 and a half, but it's probably maybe 8 and a half, 9 feet-ish wide, and about 6.5 feet long. Still got a teensy bit of raking to do when it comes to getting some of this extra grass off, but I'm gonna let it sit for a couple days. I have put lime, chicken poop essentially, and cow manure to fertilize it. You can use other soil amendments, such as peat moss, as extra soil amendments to help it grow. I've been told that some people sometimes would put the manure in the end of the growing season, at the end of the growing season, so that way it can sit over winter and decay. That way your soil does not exhaust. Typically your soil gets exhausted after 3 years or so. That's oftentimes what you hear farmers call rotation crops. They'll grow it for 2 years and then have a cover crop like grass or soybeans or something along those lines to help restore the nutrients in it. So this is a spot where I have it, and it's going to be more sun. So yeah, like I said, a little bit more raking to do to get some of this extra grass to come off like this. I gotta rake that off a little bit. Sometimes you gotta pick rocks, like this one. You gotta do picking rocks to get rid of some stuff. So I'm gonna toss that over there. You also have to worry about roots sometimes. Last year, where my garden was last year, I had a lot of roots I had to rip out. So like roots like this, you gotta take them out because they'll interfere with the growing. The rototiller will chop them up pretty good, but you have to watch out for roots, rocks, and like I said, grass shavings. I have to clean those off. But this is what an ideal, close to finished product looks like. And this is with the lime, chicken poop and whatever common I had left. And if there's any extra, you can also add topsoil if you want to add as an additional soil amendment. Just if, you know, kind of get it out there. You can go buy it at Home Depot or Lowe's or any other essentially gardening location or garden sales location, nursery like Freeport Atlantic Nursery. You can go there. I mean, any other nursery that might sell topsoil. You can mix it in with regular soil. Sometimes initial step or two would be you could take to find out what your soil contains. You can get like soil sampling kits from like Cornell Cooperative Extension, either through Suffolk County, Nassau County, or pretty much the state. Kind of test what your soil is, kind of see what's in it, and then you can go from there to kind of replenish whatever nutrients you might have that it might need. So like I said, with lime, if your soil is a little acidic, you can apply lime to it, which is what we did. I'm just doing it so I can it sort of acts as soil sweetener. So yeah, this is what it essentially looks like. Now this was my old garden last year. One of the issues I had with this garden was that it had a lot of trees by it, so it had a lot of shade. It got good sun in the morning, so I thought maybe it would be a good location. So I ended up planting here last year instead of this other location over here, which got more sun. So one of the couple of problems I had over here were, again, daytime it was too much shade. I did apply the same amendments of lime and basically chicken manure to this spot, and I mean it grew okay, but a lot of the vegetables I had didn't grow basically because of the trees. And then also there's a type of tree right here that in the past, the maple tree here had like a little leaves that just somehow, because of for some reason or another, dropped all its leaves at once. So a lot of little plants that I had last year that were attempting to grow got stunted. So I essentially had to start over, basically had to replant like twice. So this was a poor location, and as I mentioned in my previous videos, I had some thoughts on it. So these are my initial thoughts on it. Too much shade, not enough. I had other unexpected problems with too many leaves would fall in it, including these. This little tree has got little small teensy leaves, and those fell off around end of May last year, so it stunted my plants. So what we've also done is this year we've reseeded it, and we have put fertilizer in, and we have also used a sun shade mix for grass seed to make it grow again, to go for grass again. And my landlord has also added a little extra topsoil to it to make it more palatable to growing. Some fresh soil. You have to kind of refresh the soil every so often, and so he's one of the things you have to do for reseeding it is to put the seed down, the fertilizer, but you don't want to bury the seed. You only want to bury it about 1/4 inch of soil. So, or you can essentially rake it to kind of like it, just kind of get a little in, dig a little bit in, and then just kind of wet it lightly for the first couple days. That way the seed takes hold. You might have to worry about, birds, but if you keep a close eye on it, shouldn't be worried too much about it. So this area we have reseeded and are going to let it grow grass again this year. Yeah, so like I said, the problems I had last year with my garden was too much shade, leaves were a problem, and then these little leaves basically stunted the growth of my garden. So those are some problems I ran into last year. Yeah, so that's basically some of my thoughts on this one. Okay, some additional thoughts. A couple years ago, when my previous landlord was here, she allowed us to do container gardening. Container gardening is good for people that maybe live in apartments, Me and my wife decided to use these a couple years ago. Let's use these, particular containers. Like I said, these are good for apartments, people that live in the city, that might have like a balcony or a sunny spot in their apartments, or say outside, if you can, on a sidewalk maybe, you could use them. Or if you didn't want to like a big garden yourself, like the one I have, like this one right here. This one, I mean, I'm used to gardens that are probably 5,000 times the size, probably like maybe 150 feet by 40, maybe, if I remember right. But that was, when I was upstate and I was little. My father used to have gardens like this. But container gardening is good because they're small, compact. You're not going to grow a lot of vegetables with it. Initially, when I got this one, they said it could grow pepper plants, tomato plants, and maybe some lettuce all in the same box. But practically speaking, I wouldn't recommend that, or having so much vegetables planted together, because it creates a lot of problems. But if you get the proper amount of soil, which basically you can fill it up maybe to about 3/4 of the way full, maybe to about here-ish, and you could grow some small vegetables like peppers. You could probably grow anything, cucumbers. You could probably grow corn if you really, really wanted to. But the popular plants that usually grow are peppers, tomatoes. Herbs for the black box actually, I had the herbs that I had, I think 3 out of the 4 herbs that I had grew like wild cakes out of this one because the soil was loose. The soil here was a little bit more compact, so it was better for tomatoes. But the problem with container boxes that you want to look out for is, first, the soil is, there is a limited amount of soil, so the roots will go deep. And especially, like, for instance, with tomato plants, they are very nutrient heavy. So they basically take the nutrients out of the soil. So you have to kind of keep giving it plant food throughout the year, so like Miracle-Gro, to make sure that the soil stays semi-conducive to growing. So just make sure if you grow tomato plants, to use maybe like a small tomato cage if you can, and to make sure you keep watering it consistently and providing it with Miracle-Gro every couple of weeks. You don't have to go crazy with the Miracle-Gro because it is so, you can burn the roots. So that's one thing you have to be careful with. So don't overfeed it, but make sure the soil stays well fed. That way the plants will grow and continue to grow healthily all year. Because one of the problems I did run into was my tomato plants, when I did grow out of this container box, was calcium deficiency. My tomato plants developed like a spotted rash type on its stems and leaves. So that was calcium deficiency. So problem was, I noticed it late, and I started applying something called Rot Stop, which basically was, I sprayed on the outside of the leaves and plants, provide additional calcium. They absorbed the leaves, but by that point it was too late. So some of the tomatoes I didn't get a good yield that year for plants. So again, like I said, you have to watch out. Tomato plants are very nutrient heavy. They will deplete soil fast, so they have to be well kept up. You can maybe additionally apply manure throughout the year. There are, like I said, chicken manure is a good one to use throughout the year. You can keep putting it in the soil maybe once a week even, just to make sure that it gets absorbed into the soil and it keeps providing nutrients for the plants year round. Same thing with peppers. They are very water heavy. So again, like I say, you just put this box in, flip this up. There's a pipe right here. You could keep the water well fed into the bottom. And yeah, and again, the small black box was good for herbs, I found. You can even grow herbs out of this box as well, this bigger tan box, and go from there. One more important piece of tool that I sometimes like to use is small stakes, to mark where my vegetables are. Typically, you stick it in the ground, marks the location of the seed. These are also good for allowing plants to go up, keep a plant upright. We used it for a couple of tomatoes to tie it so they wouldn't get bent over. So stakes are another good thing to have when using your tools. Okay, where to start? Over here was my old garden from last year. Now, it was an okay, size. It was maybe about 5 by 10, 5 feet by 10 feet, give or take. It was an okay spot. One of the issues I had with this particular garden over here was it was too much shade. That was one of the problems I had over here gardening last year, because as you can see, it had a lot of leaves. Another thing is that there was a tree behind that where a lot of little leaves fell off. And also when this maple tree seeded or released its early season seeds, it kind of covered up my garden and it killed whatever plants I had. And then by that point it was useless in order to be able to grow anything. I mean, I still got some stuff, but it was hard. So this is one of the issues I had with this garden over here as a location of what not to use. We have since, my landlord has since reseeded it. So he used a shade type, partial shade sun type grass seed to grow it. So this is some of the problems that I had. And also, how to also reseed it. We used a little bit of fertilizer. Like I said, a shady sun, a shade variation of grass seed to reseed. So as you can see, it's reseeding nicely. And all you have to do is really just keep it watered, rough up the soil a little bit, put the seed down, fertilizer, and then just keep it watered. So that would be one of the problems I had, or a couple problems I had last year with this shade. Okay, these are containers, okay? These are good for having small gardens. This black one I used a couple of years ago for herbs, and we put in a little soil that was fairly loose, but the herbs did pretty well. I had planted 4 herbs in this one. One of the herbs, marjoram, didn't grow so well in it, but I think that was just because it needed a little bit more space than what I had for it. I have 2 of these brown containers, which I've had tomatoes and peppers in mostly. So I had 2 of these. So these are good for people that have small apartments, like have a balcony with direct sunlight, or they could just grow indoors. Preferably you want to put them outside on a porch or in a sunny area within your house. So they're compact. They're good for like city growers. If you're living in the city, you can grow plants easily enough. This thing you could probably put in a windowsill if it's big enough. So you could do that. However, a couple of the problems I had with these container gardens is you have to maintain nutrients. The herbs didn't really need a lot of nutrients per se, so they did all right in this black container. Whereas the tomatoes and even peppers, they're nutrient dependent. So you really have to keep them fertilized. So what I did when I tried to address that is I put soil and I mixed a fair amount of cow manure in and chicken poop at one point to try to keep it fertilized. However, being the fact that they are nutrient heavy, they gobbled up all the nutrients and depleted the soil pretty quickly halfway through the season. One of the problems I had with tomatoes was something called blossom rot. And basically what that is a type of disease that means that the tomato plants didn't have enough vitamin C. So I had to go get something called blossom rot, which is a spray to help keep the tomato plants healthy. However, because I got to it so late in the year, it kind of killed my yield that year for the tomato plants. But I still was able to salvage some of the tomatoes, and also what that meant, Blossom rot is also when the tomato was in the flower form, and it was starting to, before it got fertilized and started growing into fruit, the flower would just kind of rot after a couple days after blooming. So it really kind of, like I said, it killed my yield that year. So that's why I went to the main garden over there. So those are some of the advantages of container gardening, and also some disadvantages. So again, just to review, they're good for, having small gardens if you're living in the city, or have an apartment with a sunny area or a balcony or a porch you could use. Some of the disadvantages, you have to keep the nutrients well in. So one of the things you could do is keep them fertilized with Miracle-Gro, which is a liquid form of vitamins, basically. So again, the soil gets depleted fast if you use heavy plants, and you just have to kind of keep them fertilized. I think that's it. Just a quick funny story about these tomato cages. Several years ago, I was been kind of overseeing my mother-in-law's garden. It's not much bigger than the one I've showed you, mine. Hers is probably a little bit wider and longer. But what was interesting was these tomato cages. We'd put them next to the squash for some reason. We thought it might be interesting, something they could maybe, squash could also be used, summer squash, and zucchini could maybe climb up them as well. So we decided to do that early in the summer, and I had decided to take 2 weeks off. And actually maybe about a week and a half, 12 days off for a vacation. So I left to go upstate to see my folks, and when I came back, the summer squash that I had placed in here had literally shot from the ground up to about 10 feet. It was up to maybe about that bar, best estimate, with leaves. It was leaves and squash all over the place. Now granted, obviously this is not the same location, but it was about 10 feet. And it was literally over my head. I have never seen a squash do that. And it was it's what I call my super squash. So I had to trim it back a little bit with the leaves and things like that. But the interesting thing is, a little something I learned was the fact that if you trim certain types of plants like tomatoes, squash, apparently it pushes more towards the fruit, pushes more energy into the fruit to kind of quote unquote survive. And I didn't know this, so instead of normally getting like maybe 5 or 6 squash, I got like 10 or 12 summer squash, out of this particular plant. And it was funny because I used a couple of the fruit as like a general Halloween, Thanksgiving decoration. And some seeds had fallen out on the front porch and had basically started growing in her front garden later in the next year. And it was that was really funny because I said it kind of metastasized to the front yard because it was such a super squash. Like I said, I've never seen a squash do that, but it was just a little funny story about stuff.